In my head, I was like, I wanted them to be able to discover. I wanted them to be able to critically think. I wanted them to be able to go through problems and understand the hurt and realize what they gained from that and where they could grow from that. I wanted them to be able to think without me and think of consequences, right? And think of how things could turn out without mom. Welcome back to the channel. I'm excited to continue our conversation about relationships. Today we're talking about your relationship with your kids and my alternative take on raising kids. Listen in, you'll decide if you like it or not. Let's go. All right, guys, so I'm still taking questions from the IG followers, and so I want to thank our question asker today. She's Steph Sorensen 77, and her question was how you empowered your kids from a young age to be independent. Obviously, I know Steph from a while ago. I used to be a coach of hers. We've continued to be friends throughout the years, and so she's seen my kids kind of grow up into being adults from maybe the teen years, and so I understand where this question comes from. But it's I love talking about this because I very intently did very different things with my kids as I was raising them. So I like to talk about it because I just like to have people think of things differently than they know them. Not saying that it's right or that they're going to do them, but to consider alternatives. I mean, there are so many alternatives to doing everything in the world that if you just consider other ways, that maybe you can grow from that as well. So let me talk to you about how I became to parent the way that I do, or did, however you want to say that. All right, so the first thing that I want to talk about is just how I kind of want to reject this whole thing about mom shaming, parent shaming. You know, it's very prevalent in social media today. And I know there's a big movement against it, but unfortunately, it's still quite there. And I've noticed that it's become more subtle. And it's not so much other moms coming at other moms like, oh my God, I can't believe you're doing that with your kid. It's become more like people overtly doing certain things in a certain way, saying, hey, look at me, and indirectly implying that if you're not doing it this way, then you suck. You know, it's not as oh my God you suck in your face anymore. It's become more subtle, which is actually a little more scary, because when things start to get more subtle, that means it's starting to kind of get its grasp on society, and that's the kind of scary part. So I just want to reject that idea first of all, because this is not about shaming. In fact, it's kind of how I landed on the way that I've chosen to parent my daughters, and so I want to share with you like how that originated. Overall, my viewpoint of my role as a parent is that I'm simply the guide. I'm not like the dictator. I'm not the person who says, you know, this is how things should be, and if they're not, then, you know, you die and the world is over and I control everything. I didn't take that approach. Now, I will say that the approach that I landed on, that I ended up writing my book about, is really the approach that I took on and carry through. But I do want to say and state the facts that I didn't start off that way. In fact, the way that I was parenting is the way that I was parented. And so, you know, I realized pretty quickly that there were some toxic behaviors woven into the way that I was raised, and now I was passing on to my kids. And what was interesting is when my kids started just like questioning me back, or they would say things, it would give me this little remark in my head like, hey, don't you remember that? And it took me literally back to childhood. Now, as a child, I felt very unseen and very unheard. And partly that's because, you know, my dad said the word, you know, like kids should be seen and not heard, right? So there's that, right? But then there's also the part of, I was huge into curiosity. I'm still curious. I tell you guys to always be curious. I was even curious back then, and I had so many questions. And I know that there are a lot of adults that I ask questions to, that they're like, why are you as a kid asking me that question? Like, I look back now, and when I got those responses from adults, what I saw was that what I can see now is that it just made them uncomfortable. You know, a lot of the questions had to do with sex. And they're like, oh, we don't talk about that, or you're going to learn, like you're too young to talk about that, you know. And so I dove into books. I dove into encyclopedias. It's crazy how curious I was. I was just always looking for answers. So I love that part of me is still in me, because it makes me feel like I'm not completely crazy, and that curiosity is actually what has guided me to where I am today. But what it did was it just kind of set off this spark in me that you need to figure things out for yourself. You need to ask a ton of questions, and apparently adults are not people who you ask questions to. Then I became a parent at fucking 17 years old with twins, right? And that whole thing went out the window. I was like, okay, let me go back to what I know. And as my kids started getting older, I started realizing, oh, yeah, this might not be effective. Let's dial this back a little. And what I revisited was how I felt as a kid. Felt unseen, felt unheard, and I didn't like that. So what I did was I really took a different stance and said, I can't treat my kids the same way that I was treated, because then they will feel like how I felt. And I did not want to be hushed. I did not want to be quieted and stuck in a corner and being like, shh, like shushed, right, out of the world. I wanted them to have this freedom to be able to say things and not have me get weirded out, right? Their mom or their dad about it. And their dad is he's his own YouTube channel. He's gonna have to be. We have very differing viewpoints on a lot of things. And some of my parenting techniques are some of our qualms that we've had over the years. But in my head, I was like, I wanted them to be able to discover. I wanted them to be able to critically think. I wanted them to be able to go through problems and understand the hurt and realize what they gained from that and where they could grow from that. I wanted them to be able to think without me and think of consequences, right? And think of how things could turn out without mom. And really what this came down to was me looking at the very end in sight. I was starting with the end in sight, and the end was my death. Okay, obviously I'm still here, but I looked at it as I'm going to die today or I'm going to die tomorrow. What can I teach them today so that if I'm not here, they're going to be okay on their own? And so from a very young age, I was plugging things into them so that they had the grit in order to sustain themselves in their own lives. Because even though I hated the fact that I was kicked out when I was 18 years old, that is one rule that I actually did keep. And so you'll hear about that in another video where I talk about that in my book. My book is called Evicted at 8. And just the kind of backstory on that is, like, all of my kids were 8 years old when I evicted them from a house. It was a 10-year eviction notice, guys, which means that they still had to leave when they're 18. But in that 10-year window, it was just back to back to back. Like, here's how you do this. Here's how you help this person. Here's how you be a good worker. Boys, sex, masturbation, like all those different things were talked about in my house. And of course by me, because I have 4 daughters, right? I doubt my husband's going to want to be talking to any of them with that. So I definitely took on a lot of the load because I wanted to. So it's not like he was putting it on me. I really wanted to do that so that when they turned 18, they could feel confident enough. Of course, they're not going to know everything, but confident enough to go out on their own and not be so scared of the world. And that's ended up what's happening. My kids are now 18 to 23 years old, and I only have one left living at home. She's the 19-year-old, but she's got her 6 months notice already. So she'll be out, just a few months after this video comes out. So that's really where I led my girls with the independence. I didn't want to scare them. I just wanted to be serious, because that is the truth, folks. Parents, especially you mamas out there who are watching this, who follow me, I want you to think about this, because all of us, there's only a couple of things that are going to be guaranteed in our life, right? What have we heard? Death and taxes, right? Those are things that we're always going to have as a guarantee. And so we pay our taxes in whatever way we can, but there's no way that we can beat death, at least not yet. And so if it's a guarantee, how are you building your life so that you either don't have regret at the ending of your life, or so that if your ending of your life comes sooner than expected, that everyone around you doesn't just like completely fall. I've heard of families completely falling apart because mom or dad, or both mom and dad, have passed on in accidents or just, traumatic events. And so my stance was, I want them to go on without me. Like, I figure out a way to be independent on my own, and I want them to do that, but with my help. How great is it that now they get to have my life experience woven into the women that they grow up and become? Because even though they're out there living their life, they get my knowledge, they get my experience, and they still get the space to go out and make their own choices. Maybe make some mistakes and have a lot of wins, but also have some failures, because that is how one learns and grows. That's kind of the only way. Like if you have success all the time, as beautiful as it might seem, when you fail hard, and sometimes that really kills people. So I wasn't trying to do that to my kids. So all in all, the independence that I raised my girls with was really with, your mommy's gonna die one day and you need to figure out how to take care of yourself. Now, like I said in the beginning of the video, that may or may not be the way you want to do things, but that is one of the things I did. But then I also guided them along. I gave them chances to fall down. I gave them chances to have wins. I didn't react crazy when I heard certain things that they did. I have a whole video that I want to talk about called The Art of Underreaction. It's a parenting technique that I've come up with because every time my kids told me something that was, you know, shocking, I was like, oh, okay, well, tell me more about that. When inside my head, I'm going crazy, like, what the F? What? Holy shit. Like all like jumping about, pulling out my hair, like that's happening in my head. But to their face, I'm like, curious. Tell me more. You know, that was very hard to do. But what it did was it opened up this arena where the girls were like, well, this is what was on my mind. This is what I was thinking. And they would just pour themselves out. It was this beautiful thing that I was hoping for that result, and it's exactly what I got, but I didn't realize how abnormal that was. How many kids, or even friends of my children's children, who have come up to me and say like, I can't talk to my parents like that. They'd slap my face, right? Or they tell me like that's not your place. And I understand when they say that, not that those parents are bad. I'm just saying this is why I parent this way, because I wanted my kids to come to me for answers. I didn't want them to go look up, you know, what is an erection in the encyclopedia. Talk to me about it, right? Even though that might make you feel uncomfortable. So when they came to talk to me about these things, I'm like, okay, well, let's talk it through. And it's a beautiful thing to be able to know how to live the art of underreaction. But again, that'll be for another video. So for today, those are some things that you can do for your children's independence. Begin with the end in mind. Know that one day you're not going to be here. And this specifically is to some of you mamas who are maybe my age or a little older, who have adult children now, who are still in your house, who you kind of want to go. You want them to have their own independence. You know, I think about you a lot because I've worked with a lot of moms and dads who just, they can't get rid of their adult kids. And now it's gone on for so long that their kids don't have the independence they need. And mom and dad are getting frustrated. They're like, man, we thought our job was over, but shit, we're still doing this. And so I've come in to help them with doing that. And sometimes it takes me talking to their kids for the parents. But I want you to know that that is something that you have to make very real in your child's mind, especially now that they're adults. I mean, all of us are that much older, right? We're couple decades older than we were when they were born. And so now it's time to get serious, because every day that we live is a day closer to our death, right? I mean, oh God, that's so morbid, but it's so true. What are we doing to make sure that we're putting the most into our life, but also giving the most to our loved ones, so that when we're not here, they remember us with fondness and not just this whole bleak world because everything fell to shit because you're not here to hold it up anymore. Something to think about. All right, I will leave that with you folks to chew on. All right, and I'll come back with more of my parenting things as I talk more and more about the book as it's about to come out in a couple of months. Very excited about that. You're gonna see more of that stuff coming out. So glad to share it with you folks. Have a great rest of your week, rest of your day. I'm actually gonna be back tomorrow. And until I see you on the other side, you keep evolving. Bye.